Welcome to the White Collar Files, the podcast that uncovers the hidden world of financial crimes and corporate misdeeds. I'm your host, Ethan, and today we're diving deep into the scope and impact of white-collar crime on our society and economy. From billion-dollar frauds to systemic corruption, we'll explore how these sophisticated crimes affect every aspect of our lives, often without us even realizing it. Whether you're a business professional, a concerned citizen, or just curious about the darker side of the corporate world, this episode will open your eyes to the far-reaching consequences of white-collar crime. So, let's pull back the curtain and see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Today, we're exploring the scope and impact of white-collar crime on society and the economy. This is a topic that's as vast as it is important, touching every corner of our lives in ways we often don't realize. Let's start with the sheer scale of white-collar crime. While it's difficult to pin down exact figures due to the often hidden nature of these offenses, the FBI and the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners estimate the annual cost of white-collar crime in the United States to fall between $300 and $660 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of many countries. This staggering figure gives us a glimpse into the enormous scope of white-collar crime. But the impact of white-collar crime goes far beyond just financial losses. These crimes can have devastating effects on individuals, communities, and entire economies. Let's break this down and look at some specific areas of impact. First, let's consider the impact on individuals. White-collar crimes like fraud and embezzlement can wipe out people's life savings, destroy their credit, and leave them in financial ruin. For example, Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, one of the largest financial frauds in U.S. history, affected thousands of investors, many of whom lost their entire life savings. The emotional toll of such losses can be devastating, leading to stress, depression, and even suicide in extreme cases. But it's not just direct victims who suffer. White-collar crime can have ripple effects that impact entire communities. When a major company engages in fraud or other financial crimes, it can lead to job losses, reduced tax revenue for local governments, and a general economic downturn in the affected area. The collapse of Enron in 2001, for instance, led to thousands of job losses and had a significant impact on the city of Houston, where the company was based. On a broader scale, white-collar crime can undermine entire economic systems. Financial fraud and market manipulation can erode trust in financial institutions and markets, leading to reduced investment and economic growth. The 2008 financial crisis, which was partly fueled by fraudulent practices in the mortgage industry, is a stark example of how white-collar crime can contribute to systemic economic problems. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on government and public services. Tax evasion, for example, deprives governments of revenue that could be used for public services and infrastructure. The IRS estimates that tax evasion costs the U.S. government about $458 billion per year in lost revenue. This is money that could be used for schools, hospitals, roads, and other vital public services. Moreover, white-collar crime can corrupt public institutions and undermine democracy. Bribery and corruption in government can lead to policies that benefit the few at the expense of the many. This not only has direct economic impacts but can also erode public trust in government institutions, weakening the foundations of democratic society. The impact of white-collar crime extends to the business world as well. When companies engage in unethical or illegal practices, it creates an uneven playing field, making it difficult for honest businesses to compete. This can stifle innovation and economic growth. Furthermore, the reputational damage from white-collar crime can have long-lasting effects on industries. The accounting industry, for example, suffered a significant blow to its reputation following the Enron scandal and the collapse of Arthur Andersen. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on the environment. Environmental crimes, such as illegal dumping or violations of emissions standards, can cause long-term damage to ecosystems and public health. These crimes often go undetected or unpunished due to their complex nature and the resources required to investigate them. The scope of white-collar crime has expanded significantly in the digital age. Cybercrime, which often falls under the umbrella of white-collar crime, has become a major concern for individuals, businesses, and governments alike. The global cost of cybercrime is estimated to reach $10.5 trillion annually by 2025, according to Cybersecurity Ventures. This includes costs from data damage and destruction, stolen money, lost productivity, theft of intellectual property, and more. One of the challenges in addressing white-collar crime is its often complex and evolving nature. As our expert notes, as we look to the future, it's clear that white-collar crime will continue to evolve, presenting new challenges for law enforcement, regulators, and society as a whole. This constant evolution means that the scope and impact of white-collar crime are always changing, making it a moving target for law enforcement and regulators. The impact of white-collar crime on society goes beyond just economic losses. These crimes can erode public trust in institutions, both private and public. When major corporations or respected individuals are found to be engaging in criminal behavior, it can shake people's faith in the system as a whole. This erosion of trust can have far-reaching consequences, affecting everything from consumer behavior to political engagement. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on social inequality. Often, the perpetrators of white-collar crimes are wealthy and powerful individuals or corporations, while the victims are often ordinary citizens or smaller businesses. This can reinforce perceptions of a two-tiered justice system, where the rich and powerful can commit crimes with impunity while ordinary citizens face harsh consequences for much smaller offenses. The scope of white-collar crime extends to international relations as well. Cross-border financial crimes, such as money laundering and tax evasion, can have significant impacts on global economic stability. These crimes can facilitate other serious offenses, such as terrorism financing and human trafficking, further expanding their scope and impact. One of the most insidious aspects of white-collar crime is its ability to blend into legitimate business practices. As our expert points out, many white-collar criminals are skilled at disguising their illegal activities as normal business operations. This camouflage effect not only makes detection challenging but also expands the potential scope of these crimes, as they can persist unnoticed within seemingly legitimate enterprises for long periods. The impact of white-collar crime on the legal system is also significant. Prosecuting these complex cases often requires substantial resources and specialized expertise. This can strain the resources of law enforcement agencies and courts, potentially impacting their ability to address other types of crime. Moreover, the complexity of these cases can lead to lengthy and expensive trials, further taxing the legal system. White-collar crime also has a profound impact on corporate culture and business ethics. The pressure to meet financial targets or gain competitive advantages can create an environment where unethical or illegal behavior is tacitly encouraged or overlooked. This can lead to a normalization of criminal behavior within certain industries or companies, expanding the scope of white-collar crime. The scope of white-collar crime extends to the realm of politics as well. Campaign finance violations, lobbying abuses, and other forms of political corruption fall under the umbrella of white-collar crime. These offenses can have far-reaching impacts on public policy and the democratic process, potentially shaping laws and regulations in ways that benefit the few at the expense of the many. The impact of white-collar crime on innovation and economic growth is another important consideration. When companies engage in fraudulent practices to gain market share or boost profits, it can discourage legitimate innovation and competition. This can lead to stagnation in industries and hinder overall economic growth. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on professional ethics across various fields. Industries like accounting, law, and finance have had to grapple with major scandals that have led to increased scrutiny and regulation. This has resulted in changes to professional standards and ethics training, expanding the scope of how we address and prevent white-collar crime. The scope of white-collar crime extends to the nonprofit sector as well. Fraud and embezzlement in charities and other nonprofit organizations not only harm the direct victims of these crimes but also undermine public trust in philanthropic efforts. This can have a chilling effect on charitable giving, impacting the ability of legitimate organizations to carry out their missions. The impact of white-collar crime on public health is another area of concern. Healthcare fraud, including Medicare and Medicaid fraud, not only costs billions of dollars annually but can also directly impact patient care. Similarly, crimes in the pharmaceutical industry, such as the misrepresentation of drug trial data, can have serious consequences for public health. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on retirement security. Pension fund fraud and mismanagement can jeopardize the financial futures of retirees who depend on these funds. The scope of this impact is vast, potentially affecting millions of people and their families. The impact of white-collar crime on education is another important consideration. Fraud in for-profit education, student loan scams, and embezzlement in educational institutions can all have long-lasting effects on students and the education system as a whole. These crimes can lead to increased student debt, devalued degrees, and a loss of educational opportunities. The scope of white-collar crime extends to the realm of sports as well. Match fixing, doping scandals, and corruption in sports organizations all fall under the umbrella of white-collar crime. These offenses not only undermine the integrity of sports but can also have significant economic impacts on the multi-billion-dollar sports industry. White-collar crime also has a profound impact on technological innovation. Intellectual property theft, for example, can discourage companies from investing in research and development, potentially slowing technological progress. Similarly, fraud in emerging tech sectors, such as cryptocurrency, can hinder the adoption and development of new technologies. The impact of white-collar crime on small businesses is particularly severe. Small businesses often lack the resources to implement sophisticated fraud prevention measures or to absorb the losses from white-collar crime. A single instance of embezzlement or fraud can be enough to force a small business to close, impacting not just the business owners but also their employees and the local community. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on international development efforts. Corruption and fraud in international aid can divert resources away from those who need them most, hindering efforts to combat poverty and promote development in low-income countries. The scope of white-collar crime extends to the art world as well. Art fraud, money laundering through art sales, and theft of cultural property are all forms of white-collar crime that can have significant cultural and economic impacts. The impact of white-collar crime on consumer protection is another important consideration. False advertising, price fixing, and other deceptive business practices can harm consumers financially and erode trust in the marketplace. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on scientific research. Fraud in scientific studies, such as falsifying data or plagiarism, can undermine public trust in science and hinder scientific progress. This has become particularly evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, where misinformation and fraudulent research have had serious public health consequences. The scope of white-collar crime extends to the realm of cybersecurity as well. As more of our lives and business operations move online, the potential for cybercrime increases. Data breaches, identity theft, and other forms of cybercrime can have far-reaching impacts on individuals, businesses, and national security. The impact of white-collar crime on corporate governance is significant. In response to major corporate scandals, there have been increased calls for better oversight and more stringent corporate governance practices. This has led to changes in laws and regulations, expanding the scope of how we address and prevent white-collar crime in the corporate world. White-collar crime also has a profound impact on professional development and career trajectories. For those convicted of white-collar crimes, the consequences can include not just legal penalties but also long-term career impacts, including loss of professional licenses and difficulty finding future employment. The scope of white-collar crime extends to the insurance industry as well. Insurance fraud is a major issue that not only costs the industry billions of dollars annually but also leads to higher premiums for honest policyholders. The impact of white-collar crime on national security cannot be overlooked. Economic espionage, for example, can threaten a country's competitive advantage in key industries. Similarly, financial crimes can be used to fund terrorism or other activities that threaten national security. White-collar crime also has a significant impact on urban development. Real estate fraud and corruption in urban planning can shape the development of cities in ways that benefit criminals at the expense of communities. This can lead to issues like gentrification, inadequate affordable housing, and environmental problems. The scope of white-collar crime extends to the food industry as well. Food fraud, including the mislabeling of products and the use of substandard ingredients, can have serious health consequences for consumers and economic impacts on honest producers. Finally, it's important to consider the psychological impact of white-collar crime on society. The revelation of major frauds or corruption scandals can lead to a general sense of cynicism and distrust, potentially impacting social cohesion and civic engagement. In conclusion, the scope and impact of white-collar crime on society and the economy are vast and multifaceted. From direct financial losses to erosion of trust in institutions, from environmental damage to threats to public health, white-collar crime touches nearly every aspect of our lives. Its effects ripple through our communities, our economy, and our democratic institutions. Understanding the full scope and impact of white-collar crime is crucial for developing effective strategies to combat it. As these crimes continue to evolve, so too must our approaches to prevention, detection, and prosecution. By staying informed and vigilant, we can all play a role in combating white-collar crime and mitigating its harmful effects on our society and economy. That brings us to the end of today's episode of the White Collar Files. I hope this exploration of the scope and impact of white-collar crime has been as eye-opening for you as it has been for me. If you found this episode informative, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Your support helps us continue to shed light on these important issues and bring you in-depth analyses of the world of white-collar crime. Join us next time as we delve into another fascinating aspect of financial misconduct. Until then, stay informed and keep questioning.